A stack of resumes sat untouched as the applicant's hands trembled slightly, her suit jacket too large at the shoulders. The lead interviewer, barely looking up, tapped his pen and said, "You don't have any corporate background. Why are you here?" In this room, military credentials seemed invisible, a common problem for veterans whose service rarely fits into civilian checkboxes. When the panel demanded proof, she paused, her eyes steady. Then she spoke 3 words in a voice barely above a whisper. Silence closed in. The CEO's face drained of color, recognizing a code name used only in top-tier intelligence. Suddenly, every assumption in the room shifted. In corporate interviews, veterans like Jessica Cole often become invisible the moment they sit down. The panel's attention drifted as she entered, her navy suit hanging loose at the shoulders, sleeves a touch too long. She moved quietly, placing her resume on the table, her fingers interlaced and knuckles pressed white. There was nothing in her posture that hinted at command or military discipline, just a careful restraint, the kind that can be mistaken for uncertainty. The interview panel barely acknowledged her arrival. The lead interviewer opened her folder and read her name aloud, then skimmed the resume with thinly veiled impatience. "Jessica Cole, your resume lists—" "What exactly is relevant experience?" he asked, pausing at a line he couldn't decipher. 12 years, as which unit?" His finger hovered over the unfamiliar acronym, his tone making it clear he expected an answer that would fit neatly into their world. Jessica replied evenly. 31 Cyber Operations Group, Military Cyber Defense. Her eyes flicked to the security director, who regarded her with mild suspicion. The head of client relations leaned in, voice clipped. "We handle Fortune 500 companies. It's not clear how your background applies to our risk matrices." She tapped a polished nail on a section listing commendations, her meaning unmistakable. "These mean nothing to us without context." Jessica started to explain, outlining how she led joint cyber-physical security teams, but the director shifted in his seat, the sound of fabric stretching filling the pause. He cut her off. "Miss Cole, our clients want consultants who speak their language, not mission reports." His words landed heavily, the disconnect between military service and corporate expectations exposed. She hesitated, jaw set. The client relations director pressed further. "Have you ever briefed a corporate board, or just tactical teams?" Her tone suggested the answer was already decided. Jessica's hands came apart, one palm flat on the table, the other reaching toward her collar, as if to adjust a tie that wasn't there. "I led teams under active engagement conditions," she said quietly. A beat of silence followed. The lead interviewer slid his evaluation form aside, voice flat. "We need to see credentials that translate here. Service records aren't enough." Jessica looked down, then met his eyes. "Ask Director Morrison about Operation Silent Viper." The security director's pen slipped from his hand and hit the floor, the sound sharp in the quiet room. The panel exchanged uncertain glances, their skepticism giving way to something else as the conversation shifted. The tension in the air thickened, setting the stage for the next round of questions. The client relations director let Jessica's resume fall to the table and fixed her with a stare. "Walk us through how anything here applies to securing corporate servers." Each word landed with a deliberate edge, as if she doubted Jessica could follow. "We're not defending against whatever these are." Her finger jabbed at the mention of asymmetric warfare protocols. Jessica's shirt collar darkened slightly, her breath measured. "The principles of asset hardening translate across environments," she began. The security director interrupted, voice dry. "We protect billion-dollar portfolios, not foxholes. Give us something relevant." Jessica didn't flinch. "Last year in Dubai, your clients lost $12 million in intellectual property through a breach in their HVAC system. My team wrote the countermeasures NATO uses for these kinds of firmware, vulnerabilities, similar to what was exploited in the Nairobi embassy attack." Her tone remained even, almost quiet. An executive gave a short, dismissive laugh. "You expect us to believe you handled operational plans for this unit?" He squinted at her resume. "There's not even a public record of it." The security director pushed his chair back, arms folded. "How many boardroom presentations have you given about risk matrices?" He gestured broadly. "That's what matters here." Jessica's hands pressed flat to the table, her posture unwavering. 3 weeks ago, someone accessed your building's SCADA system through parking garage sensors. Her voice stayed soft, but the words landed with precision. The room stilled. The security director's face sharpened. That information isn't public. He studied her, suspicion edging into his voice. Jessica met his gaze. Neither was Nairobi. The silence stretched, heavy and unbroken. The client relations director reached for her phone, fingers unsteady. The security director's jaw tightened, his eyes darting between his colleagues. The lead interviewer finally spoke, his voice thin. "Miss Cole, if you think name-dropping classified incidents will impress us." Jessica leaned forward, her words clear, but no louder than before. "I didn't come here to impress you. I came to warn you." Without warning, the door opened, and the CEO's assistant stepped in, her expression uncertain. "Mr. Garrison needs to see this candidate." She hesitated, glancing at the panel. Immediately. Jessica's right hand dropped to her side, tension leaving her shoulders. The executives stayed frozen, their attention fixed on the assistant. The assistant cleared her throat, her voice barely steady. "He said to ask about the Kuwait City Protocol." The security director's chair scraped backward as he stood, the sudden movement breaking the spell that had settled over the room. Jessica's gaze remained steady, fixed on the assistant as the question lingered. The air in the room felt heavier, the silence marked by the faint hum of the ventilation system. She didn't move at first, just a small tilt of her head enough to register the assistant's presence at the edge of her vision. She spoke, her voice low and controlled. "Ask Director Morrison about Operation Silent Viper." The words barely crossed the space between them, meant only for those who knew to listen. There was no need for explanation. The code name itself was tightly held, recognized only within the highest echelons of special operations. In military circles, such call signs carried entire histories, each one a shorthand for years of training, covert actions, and survival in places that didn't exist on any map. Here, in this corporate conference room, the phrase cut through layers of protocol and pretense. The security director's hand hovered uncertainly over his phone, then dropped it to the table with a dull thud. The client relations director's pen slipped from her grasp and rolled into the shadows beneath the table. The HR coordinator stopped mid-motion, her hands suspended over her closed laptop. For a moment, no one seemed quite sure what they had just heard. Jessica didn't elaborate. She let the words settle, their meaning slowly unfurling. The recognition didn't arrive all at once. The HR coordinator's eyes widened first, her posture rigid. The client relations director's breath caught in her throat, lips parted as she tried to reconcile the resume in front of her with the weight of those two words. The security director processed at last, his brow furrowing as he pieced together the implications. No one reached for their water glasses. No one shifted in their seats. For a full stretch of seconds, the only sound was the faint click of the HVAC cycling off, leaving the room in a hush that felt absolute. The security director broke the silence, voice unsteady. "That operation was classified at the highest level. There aren't supposed to be any living witnesses." His words betrayed a mix of disbelief and something closer to fear. Jessica remained composed, her hands open on the table, a faint scar visible along her right knuckle in the shifting light. "Check the signatures," she replied, still soft but unmistakably firm. The HR coordinator closed her laptop, the snap sharp in the stillness. The client relations director pressed her palms against the table, knuckles whitening. The security director's breathing grew shallow. He glanced at Jessica's left wrist, noting the thin white line just below her watermark that needed no explanation for those who understood. Jessica offered nothing further. She waited, allowing the coded reference to do its work. The call sign was more than a name. It was a key, unlocking a hidden narrative, forcing the panel to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the applicant seated before them. The assistant hovered uncertainly at the edge of the room, caught between protocol and the sudden gravity of the moment. The director did not look up. He seemed to be searching for the right words, but found none. The atmosphere shifted. The panel's skepticism dissolved, replaced by a kind of uneasy attention. The old posture of dismissal faded, replaced by something closer to awe, as if the room itself had grown smaller around Jessica's presence. The silence persisted, stretching thin. each person processing what the call sign revealed. The change in the air was subtle but undeniable, setting the stage for the next realization, one that would leave the panel seeing Jessica in an entirely new light. The sudden quiet in the room was complete. The client relations director pressed both hands to the table, nails digging into the wood, her eyes fixed on Jessica as if seeing her for the first time. The security director's face had gone pale, his hand trembling near the rim of his coffee mug. The HR coordinator's fingers hovered in the air, frozen above her laptop. The door opened, and CEO Garrison stepped inside, his frame filling the doorway. Silver star cufflinks caught the overhead light as he adjusted his sleeve, a subtle signal to anyone who recognized their meaning. He didn't look at his team. His gaze landed on Jessica, and he paused, taking in the details: her posture, the set of her jaw, the faint scar at her collar. He moved forward, each step measured. "You," he said, voice roughened by surprise, "at the airport." The words carried more weight than the panel seemed to understand. The security director made a sound, half choked, as if he'd tried to speak and failed. Jessica's fingers rested lightly on the table, her expression unchanged. "Sir." The response was neutral, stripped of any emotion or expectation. Garrison's right hand twitched toward his jacket pocket, then stilled. He turned to his executives, his stance straightening as if he were back in uniform. "Did you really challenge her credentials?" His tone was incredulous, not accusatory, the disbelief clear in his eyes. No one answered. Garrison's focus returned to Jessica. He squared his shoulders, old habits surfacing. "The after-action reports we got were redacted. They told us your team." He stopped, the rest of the sentence left unsaid. A bead of sweat darkened his collar. The HR coordinator found her voice. "Mr. Garrison, her application doesn't show." "Of course it doesn't." Garrison didn't look away from Jessica. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the back of a chair. "Black box operations aren't on resumes. She's the reason we have protocols for SCADA attacks. Half our playbooks trace back to her work." The security director's coffee mug tipped, contents spreading across the evaluation forms. No one reached for it. Jessica watched the spill, her breathing steady. She spoke quietly. "We should discuss the vulnerabilities in your Singapore office." Garrison's attention sharpened. The executives exchanged uncertain glances. "The what?" The client relations director's voice was thin. Jessica turned slightly toward Garrison. "They're using the same vector as the embassy incident." A muscle worked in Garrison's jaw. "I'll call Zurich." The security director tried to protest. "Sir, this is highly irregular. We can't—" Garrison's look cut him off. "Put her in the war room. Full access. And get legal for an NDA that actually covers what she's done." Jessica's fingers tensed, the first sign of strain. "I didn't agree to," he interrupted faster than anyone else had. "Name your team. We'll bring them in, whatever you need." The client relations director's shoulders slumped. Jessica studied Garrison for a long moment, then nodded once. The motion shifted her collar, exposing a second scar above her collarbone. "No one mentioned salary." Garrison lowered his voice. "Welcome back, Lieutenant." Jessica's spine straightened, an automatic response. The executives leaned back, their chairs creaking. The hierarchy in the room had shifted. Garrison checked his watch. "Your old CO is on the next flight. He's been trying to find you." For a fleeting moment, Jessica's composure slipped, her pupils widened before she mastered herself again. The security director made the sign of the cross beneath the table, unnoticed by the rest. The tension in the room did not dissipate. Instead, it pooled, waiting for what would come next, as the panel's understanding deepened and the reality of who they were dealing with began to take shape. The security chief entered the war room, eyes fixed not on faces but on Jessica's hands, as if expecting something unexpected. He carried a tablet, its blue glow illuminating the lines of his jaw. The device displayed her decrypted service record information that should not have existed outside classified vaults. An analyst nearby stared at the screen, his knuckles white against the tabletop. Jessica sat quietly, a cup of coffee cooling beside her, untouched. On the wall, live feeds from the Singapore office flickered in and out, red warnings pulsing across the monitors. The security chief's voice faltered. "Phantom Sierra 70, 2 Alpha." He paused, swallowing. "That was your call sign during the Nairobi embassy siege. He scrolled through the file. Officially, you were listed as liaison support. Unofficially, this was a classified assignment. Garrison took the tablet from him, his expression unchanged. The Marine Fast Team got the credit for neutralizing the threat, he said, eyes scanning the document. But the after action mentions a cyber warfare specialist accessing climate controls minutes before the breach. His voice carried the weight of someone reading between the lines. Jessica's fingers twitched near the coffee cup, the movement almost imperceptible. A junior analyst broke the silence. That's how the systems were compromised, he said, glancing from Jessica to the Singapore feed. It's the same exploit pattern. Garrison's tie had loosened. He kept scrolling. Vladivostok, he said, not as a question. Jessica exhaled softly, her collar still creased from earlier tension. The security chief leaned back, voice lowered. The energy grid hack. NSA briefed us on the failsafes that came after. Garrison's thumb hovered over the tablet. You received a Distinguished Intelligence Cross. He paused, posthumously. The room grew quiet except for the hum of equipment. Jessica's reflection shimmered in the monitor glass. Garrison continued, Lieutenant Jessica Cole, 3rd Special Activities Group, attached to Joint Special Operations Command for Operation Wedge 3. Your team developed protocols for hostile infrastructure penetrations, all classified above top secret. Jessica's left hand rested on the table, a thin scar circling her wrist. He stopped scrolling. They burned your records after Kovacs Tower. His voice shifted, the corporate edge gone. You were on that roof. Jessica answered the monitors, not the man. Evacuation orders came late. We rerouted emergency services through the tunnels. Someone had to reboot the grid from the server room. Her thumb traced the scar on her wrist. The security chief made a sound, remembering the headline shows survivors emerged from a blackout, details never fully explained. Garrison set the tablet down. You took the collapse to erase the logs. That's why you're dead on paper. Jessica stood, the movement careful. They're in the Singapore system again, she said, pointing to code on the screen. Same signature as Nairobi. Garrison's phone buzzed with a Defense Department prefix. He ignored it. How many breaches? Jessica's eyes stayed on the monitors. 8 corporate, 3 government, all using protocols built from our classified after actions. Her hands moved quickly, disabling exploits. The analysts couldn't follow. Her call sign was nowhere in the files. Yet when she accessed the Singapore logs, the system prompted for credentials older than most staff. She entered a code, and the system accepted it without hesitation. The attack stopped. Jessica stepped back, her sleeve riding up to reveal a jagged scar. Garrison's phone buzzed again. He declined the call. Welcome aboard, Lieutenant. The security chief's skepticism faded, replaced by something close to respect. Jessica adjusted her watch, the scar vanishing beneath the band. Call sign still classified, she said. No one asked for more. Across the monitors, green status lights replaced the red. The junior analyst's hands shook as he reached for his headset. Garrison watched Jessica work, understanding settling in. The air in the war room cooled, and the shift in atmosphere was almost physical. Garrison's attention shifted, his posture no longer that of a CEO presiding over a candidate, but of a peer consulting another expert. He drew his chair beside Jessica, not across from her, signaling a subtle but unmistakable change. The room's dynamic had altered. Those who remained watched quietly. The usual corporate hierarchy set aside. The client relations director hovered by the door, still clutching her tablet, but her earlier confidence had faded. Garrison leaned forward, voice quiet. How many of the Singapore vulnerabilities are legacy issues? His tie lay discarded on the table, forgotten. The question was direct, not adversarial. 12 confirmed entry points, Jessica replied, her tone even. Half are tied to vendor firmware from 2019. She spoke without notes, tracing the edge of the biometric scanner with her thumb. The monitors behind her displayed green status lights, the threat already contained. The security chief, who earlier had challenged every line of her resume, now listened in silence. His arms crossed, he watched Jessica work, the skepticism in his features replaced by something closer to respect. Garrison's phone vibrated again. He ignored it, eyes on Jessica. Your team from the embassy, he said. "Are any available for immediate support?" Jessica glanced at the security chief. "Some," she answered. "Not all." The HR coordinator, who had once kept a running tally of resume gaps, now sat still, her laptop closed. She no longer asked about civilian experience or presentation skills. Garrison reached for a legal pad. "We'll draft new contracts today. You'll have the clearance you need." He didn't mention compensation. The priorities had shifted. The value of Jessica's expertise was no longer in question. The client relations director's voice was small. "Should we notify the board?" "After Zurich," Garrison said, writing quickly. "First, Jessica secures Singapore. Then we brief the executive team." The security chief glanced at his phone. "Pentagon's asking about our logs. Should I respond?" Jessica answered before Garrison could. "Tell them to check the Kuwait City backups." The chief blinked, then nodded. His earlier doubts had vanished. Garrison slid his notepad to Jessica. "List whoever you need for the QRF." His military-issue cufflinks glinted under the lights. Jessica wrote 6 names and 6 call signs. No further explanation was necessary. The balance of power had shifted. The panel who once doubted her now deferred to her judgment, waiting for her decisions before moving forward. Garrison's deference was clear, his tone no longer commanding but collaborative. Jessica's watch caught the room's light as she finished the list, her scars hidden but understood. The interview had become something else: consultation, a briefing, a handover of responsibility. Those present recognized the shift, their questions replaced by a quiet readiness to follow her lead. No one spoke of her lack of corporate experience. No one referenced her resume again. They understood that what mattered most had never been written down. In the silence that followed, the panel began to realize how much they had overlooked. What they'd dismissed as gaps were, in fact, doors they hadn't known how to open. And as Jessica Cole prepared to leave the room, a new understanding settled over those who remained done, that would change how they saw every veteran who came after her. Jessica Cole's military background remained invisible by design. The suit that didn't quite fit, the careful pause when asked about her unit, these were deliberate choices. Veterans often find that service records, rather than clarifying, only add confusion for civilian employers. In interviews, it is easier to let assumptions linger than to explain why a decade of crisis management and rapid decision-making doesn't translate neatly into a single line on a resume. The security chief, reviewing her decrypted file, saw the pattern too late. What looked like gaps in employment were deployments erased from public records. The awkwardness in her answers was not uncertainty, but a habit formed from years of compartmentalizing information. Veterans learn to filter their stories, skipping over moments that don't fit the civilian script. They avoid mentioning shrapnel scars from Nairobi because, as the research notes, veterans sometimes hide visible wounds to avoid unwanted attention or uncomfortable questions. Jessica's hand at her collar was not nervousness. It was routine, a practice gesture to keep the past out of sight. Small details revealed the disconnect. The client relations director watched Jessica's hands, uncertain what to expect. In the corporate world, leadership is measured in quarterly reports and slide decks. There is little recognition for the kind of authority forged when every decision carries real consequences. Garrison noticed the difference. He recognized the subtle cues. The way Jessica scanned for exits, the precision of her language, the habit of observing before speaking. Jessica had not concealed incompetences, had managed perception. Civilian interviews reward those who can summarize achievements in broad, familiar terms. There is less patience for stories that begin with a midnight radio call and end with a medevac under fire. The panel's doubts were not unusual. Most employers see only the surface. A candidate who hesitates, who seems guarded, who doesn't list her most critical accomplishments because they never made it into any public record. Her reveal was quiet, a call sign, spoken with the weight of years behind it. The shock was not at her skill, but at the realization of what had gone unseen. The signs had always been present: her immediate recognition of a security flaw, her precise terminology, her calm under scrutiny. These details had been dismissed as quirks, not as evidence of experience. The HR coordinator's eyes lingered on the thin chain at Jessica's wrist, a dog tag, not jewelry. The scar at her collarbone, hidden beneath fabric, was left unmentioned. The research described it well. Veterans often conceal the marks of their service, knowing that attention in civilian spaces is rarely welcome. Jessica did not correct the panel's misunderstandings. Veterans seldom do. The hesitation that reads as uncertainty is often threat assessment. The detailed answers are the product of a world where precision matters more than style. She allowed the assumptions to stand until the moment they could not. The room's atmosphere shifted, but Jessica remained steady. Her value was never in the lines of her resume, but in the quiet certainty of someone who had already done what others could only imagine. As the panel sat in silence, the reality of what they had overlooked settled in. The hum of servers from another continent filled the quiet, a reminder that her impact extended far beyond the room. The lights overhead cast long reflections on the polished table, and the panel remained still, each considering what they had missed. After Jessica Cole left the conference room, the quiet remained. The security chief stood by the window, his reflection merging with the city lights outside. He pressed his hand to the sill, the imprint of his wedding ring faint in the wood. Across the room, the HR coordinator sat unmoving, her tablet still open to Jessica's sparse application. Red underlines marked the places where the truth had hidden itself in plain sight. Garrison moved quickly, signing off on new authorizations with a steady hand. The urgency was clear. Jessica's credentials now unlocked access to restricted floors protocols, adjusted in real time, the usual waiting periods swept aside. No one spoke of onboarding or background checks. The rules had shifted, and everyone in the room understood why. The client relations director broke the silence first, sliding her coffee toward the middle of the table. "We should update how we vet veterans," she said, her voice quiet. The suggestion hung unanswered, but no one dismissed it. Jessica's departure had been as unremarkable as her arrival. She nodded once to Garrison and stepped into the elevator, leaving no trace of the upheaval she'd caused. The security chief watched her cross the parking lot, her stride measured. He wondered how many times she had left a room like this, her impact only understood after she was gone. Garrison's phone rang. He listened, then set it down. "Pentagon wants the Singapore logs," he said. "They're sending someone." His tone suggested this was now routine. The HR coordinator finally closed her laptop. "Should we backdate her clearance?" she asked, uncertainty in her voice. The security chief shook his head, a tired smile flickering. "Which records? The ones that don't exist, or the ones we're not supposed to see?" Garrison gathered the signed forms. "Give her whatever title she wants," he said, not looking up. The matter was settled. In the lobby, new instructions awaited the receptionist. Jessica Cole was to bypass sign-in and go straight to the war room. The security footage from the interview had already been archived. Procedures changed without debate. Garrison stood adjusting his cuffs. "We're reevaluating all applicants with special operations backgrounds," he announced. No one objected. Until today, they wouldn't have recognized someone like Jessica if she'd walked in twice. A notification chimed on the security chief's phone. Singapore systems were secure. He wiped his brow. She fixed it in under 2 minutes. Garrison's gaze lingered on the biometric scanner. The last code entered began with JTFAN acronym they would later learn referred to a joint task force that officially didn't exist. The details would surface slowly. The protocols Jessica wrote under fire. The missions erased from public record. For now, the team waited in the fluorescent light, aware that something fundamental had shifted. As the HR coordinator gathered her things, she stumbled, catching herself on the doorframe echo of the limp Jessica had concealed. The difference was clear to her now. Garrison lingered, glancing once more at the empty chair. Jessica's actions had not only changed the company's perspective but echoed something deeper, the hope that truth, once revealed, could bring justice, closure, and a renewed respect for those whose service too often goes unseen. The company would soon question how many other veterans they had overlooked. The conversation, once about credentials and gaps, had shifted to recognition and value, setting the stage for a broader reckoning. Recognition of military service in the civilian workforce remains inconsistent, despite years of advocacy and incremental policy changes. Jessica Cole's interview is not just a singular event, it reflects a systemic disconnect, where companies often misinterpret the signals veterans send. The suit that doesn't fit, the careful answers, the gaps in the resume. These are not red flags, but adaptations. For many veterans, the safest approach is to let assumptions stand rather than try to translate experiences few civilians understand. The gap widens when hiring managers rely on familiar credentials, missing the substance behind a career spent under pressure that rarely makes it onto a corporate application. The disconnect is not limited to a single company or industry. Recruiters often mistake the directness of military communication for a lack of flexibility, or see short stints and classified assignments as signs of instability. Jessica's experience briefing generals in war zones was ignored in favor of more familiar, but far less rigorous, corporate benchmarks. Her technical knowledge developed in environments where mistakes have immediate consequences was dismissed until a crisis made its value undeniable. Veterans routinely understate their skills. What reads as logistics coordination on a resume might mean orchestrating supply chains through conflict zones. The research notes that veterans sometimes hide visible wounds to avoid unwanted attention or uncomfortable questions. Jessica's avoidance of certain topics, her habit of scanning exits, her reluctance to expand on team leadership, these are not limitations, but the result of years spent in environments where discretion is survival. The skills acquired in those settings, decisive action, risk assessment, rapid adaptation, are exactly the qualities that companies claim to value, yet often fail to recognize. Organizations like Hire Heroes USA have developed practical ways to bridge this divide, helping veterans reframe platoon leadership as team management and extraction protocols as crisis response. These efforts matter, but they only go so far if hiring practices remain rigid. The story demonstrates how quickly perceptions can shift when someone finally asks the right question or when a crisis reveals the depth of experience that was there all along. Corporate policies are slowly changing. Some firms have begun to train hiring managers to look beyond keywords, to ask about decision-making under pressure instead of focusing on formal degrees. There are pilot programs for veteran mentorship and onboarding, and some states now offer incentives for companies that make meaningful hires. Still, the most significant change comes when individuals in the room recognize what they are missing and choose to act differently. Jessica's interview is a reminder that much of what matters is hidden in plain sight. The challenge is not whether veterans can adapt to civilian life, but whether civilian workplaces can adapt to the reality of what veterans bring. The next steps are not just about policies or quotas. They depend on the willingness to listen, to ask better questions, and to see past the surface. In the wake of the interview, the company's procedures changed, but so did the quiet expectations of those who witnessed it. The shift was not dramatic, but it was lasting. In the hours that followed, the story's impact lingered, not in headlines or press releases, but in the way people paused before making assumptions about the next unfamiliar resume that crossed their desk. Outside, the city lights flickered against the glass. For Jessica Cole, the interview was over, but the weight of what came before and what might come after remained with her as she sat in the quiet of her car, hands pressed to the steering wheel, waiting for the world to settle. From the driver's seat, Jessica Cole let herself sit in silence for a moment, the muted sounds of the parking lot outside offering a kind of pause she rarely allowed. The interview was over, but the internal calculations continued what she had revealed, what she had chosen to keep hidden, and whether any of it would matter when the next crisis arrived. She had spent years learning to read a room before speaking, to measure every word and gesture. That instinct did not fade just because the setting had changed from briefing rooms to boardrooms. She glanced at her phone, its screen crowded with missed calls and messages from the security firm. The urge to respond was there, but she set it aside. For veterans like Jessica, the hardest part of any transition is not the work itself, but the act of holding so much back, of being measured by standards that rarely fit. The suit jacket still sat stiff on her shoulders, a reminder of all the times she had tried to fit into a world that didn't know how to read her story. It was not discomfort, but habit. She had learned to let people underestimate her, to let them see only what they expected, until the moment it no longer mattered. The job offer itself felt secondary. Her decision had been made long before the formalities. In the instant she recognized the firm's blind spots and the stakes behind their questions. She knew the routine, the skepticism, the careful probing, the moment when someone finally realized what she could do. Yet each time, the emotional weight was different. Today, it was the memory of her team that pressed most heavily. In her glove compartment, a small case held 6 dog tags reminders of those who had not come home. She touched the case briefly, a silent acknowledgement. There was no sense of triumph as she replayed the day's events. If anything, there was a muted relief that she hadn't had to say more, relief that the conversation had shifted before she was forced to recount details best left unspoken. The research describes how veterans sometimes hide visible wounds to avoid unwanted attention or uncomfortable questions. For Jessica, the scars were not just physical, they were the habits of silence, the careful omissions, the constant vigilance that never quite left. Before leaving, she planned one stop. A quiet visit to Arlington, where she would stand at a marker with no name, honoring a promise made years ago. It was a ritual, one that grounded her after each new chapter. She carried a letter in her pocket, addressed to a family she had never met, meant for a day when words might offer some measure of closure. The company's needs would wait. Zurich, Garrison, the next urgent call, those could all be addressed in due time. For now, the real work was in remembering why she had chosen this path, and in holding space for those who could not make the transition themselves. What happened in the interview room was only a small part of the story. The challenge ahead was broader and not hers alone to face. For organizations seeking to close the gap between military experience and civilian opportunity, the first step is often the simplest. Reconsider how job requirements are written. Many companies default to language that unintentionally excludes veterans, asking for specific degrees or civilian certifications, while overlooking leadership, problem-solving, and technical skills acquired in military settings. A job post that asks for project management experience, but fails to mention team leadership in high-pressure environments, risks missing out on candidates who have coordinated supply drops in conflict zones, managed communications under fire. Rewriting these descriptions with veteran-friendly language opens the door to a wider, more capable talent pool. Partnerships with veteran support organizations are equally essential. Groups like Hire Heroes USA and similar nonprofits offer guidance on translating military roles into civilian terms, ensuring that a resume listing platoon leader or communications specialist is recognized for what it truly means: leading teams, managing crises, and adapting to rapidly changing situations. These organizations also provide training for HR teams and hiring managers, helping them understand the nuances of military culture and the value of skills that don't always fit neatly into corporate categories. When companies make use of these resources, they not only attract more veteran applicants, but also create a more welcoming environment for those who join. Addressing unconscious bias is critical. Many hiring managers, often unintentionally, view resume gaps or unfamiliar job titles with suspicion, unaware that these may mark periods of deployment or classified assignments. Comprehensive training can help staff recognize and counteract these biases, replacing assumptions with a more accurate understanding of veteran experience. Some organizations now offer civilian-friendly skill transcripts alongside the DD-214, making it easier to match military credentials with organizational needs. Retention and advancement require more than just hiring. Veteran employee resource groups, mentorship programs, and recognition initiatives help foster a sense of belonging. When veterans see their experience valued, not just acknowledged, they are more likely to stay, contribute, and lead. Tracking metrics such as veteran retention and promotion rates allows companies to assess their progress and refine their practices, ensuring that support is sustained beyond the hiring process. Individuals also have a role. Volunteering with veteran organizations, mentoring those in transition, or simply learning more about the challenges veterans face can make a difference. It does not require a security clearance or military background, just a willingness to listen and act. The next great hire might be the veteran whose resume seems unfamiliar, whose experience is described in terms you have not encountered before. Sometimes all it takes is a closer look and a willingness to ask the right question. The real measure of progress is not in the number of veterans hired, but in how well their skills are recognized and put to use. The interview room may empty, but the impact of that recognition lingers, shaping how every future candidate is seen. Jessica Cole left quietly, her steps measured and unhurried. The conference room door closed behind her, leaving only the memory of her presence a reminder that not all service leaves visible marks. Garrison's fingers traced the armrest where she'd gripped the chair, the impression faint but lasting. Some heroism stays hidden until the right moment demands it. The question isn't who veterans wear, it's who they still are when no one's looking. Sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the greatest capacity to protect us all. If stories like Jessica's resonate with you, consider subscribing for more accounts of unsung veterans and the impact they continue to make.